Spring Chinook. I am Jarod Higginbotham. This is Shane Magnuson, and we talked to Bob's. We decided to come out here and kind of teach you guys like what we've learned about Spring Chinook fishing. Different ways we catch them as we go upriver, why we change, why we adapt, what we use to adapt, and it's just stuff we talk about this stuff between the two of us all year long. We hang out all the time, and so we like sharing this stuff. And
we've had some pretty long night conversations on this stuff.
Yeah, and way into the rabbit hole, like way out in left field and stuff, But so we like to share this stuff with people. And we have been starting the seminar is, I kind of go through like start of tackle prep, like how I get to the point of even go fishing. A lot of people miss that part, and majority of the fish that I do catch are 90% of the fish I say are caught in my garage or in my boat getting stuff ready, right? I'm always prepared for every situation. So that's kind of, where I start with it. And, in the beginning of the year when I get my rods out, like right now, I've been using these rods for seminars. So first thing I'm going to do when I get home with these things and get them ready to go in my boat is I'll wash them. I'll wash my reels. I'm very picky about all this stuff. I'll clean them. And then I will put brand new line on all of them. The line I put on last year probably twice, but I'm so picky about my line for my reels that I like them all full, because if you're not familiar with a line counter and how it actually works, it works in rotations. It doesn't actually click out measurements in feet that go by. And so if you've got line counter reels that are half full, 3/4 full, and full, they're going to give you different measurements. Even though it might only be a few feet, sometimes that few feet can make a lot of difference. And so I like to make sure that everything's fresh, all my gear is good to go, rods are good, check all your eyelets to make sure that there's none knocked out, and then make sure all your reels are full with both new braid. That's a great way that I start. And check your reels for screws that came out. Just get all that stuff out of the way before you even hit the water. That's kind of like my beginning prep. I wash all my flashers. I wash them Lemon Scent Joy. I wash all my flashers. I do all that stuff and prep everything that I'm going to take. Every plug that I think I might use, stuff, I wash it all. Lemon Scent Joys is one of your best ones. Crest Original Toothpaste works well. There were some tests they ran years ago in the river in Alaska for that. Those two things didn't seem to bother the salmon. Those are things I use. Doesn't seem to bother them. That's kind of how I prep and get ready before I start tying gear and getting to point B.
And something to add on to that is talking about your line counters and your line counter reels. Different line counter reels will read different also. So not only having one reel with less line versus the other is going to change your line counters, but if you're running a one brand versus another, they all can be a little bit different. So if you're running multiple rods, having the same brand line counter you're running on each rod also makes a difference in keeping everything dialed in. But that prep time of cleaning and fresh line at the beginning of the year right now is super important to the season, especially on these early fish.
No, it's important. It's important to get that stuff ready. Now, now we've talked about that. We talk about kind of like what rods and reels and lines, do we use and really why. Over the years, rods have become more advanced, like anything else, right? You have better tools for your program. And as far as 360 fishing goes, there are rods out there that do fish better than other rods. 100%. I did a huge extensive test last year on 360 fishing alone, and I fished every manufacturer rod you can think of, all the top and middle ones, and I fished them very extensively. And what I found is the Okumas fished best out of all of them. The X-Trolls and the Guide Select Classics fished really good. The seconds would have been the Edge rods are right there. They're really, really good. And then Striker fishes pretty good. After that, they kind of fall off a little bit as far as the action. And so the rods that I particularly choose for this style of fishing and for springer fishing are the XTC 1092H, which is an Okuma rod. It's 10'9", and X-Trolls. And I love these things. As far as 360 fishing goes for me, they made me a way better fisherman last year. Like, I'm a good fisherman anyway. I catch a lot of fish. And we did extensive tests, like putting our one brand rod over here and then the Okumas over here, and they would be firing, and we'd switch them and start mixing them up, and they would fire better, but you could see it in the flasher. And so the rods I chose for that reason, which we'll go into more depth later. And length can be anything from, you like 9.2, a 9.2 that the Edge makes a decent one, right?
So I stagger my rods a lot, and I agree with you. The Okumas and the Edges are probably the best two for fishing 360s, but they also both fish flashes really well.
Triangles really well.
I run the 1064 in the Edge, and it's soft enough to run a fish flash and a bait. So they're both good rods. But as far as lengths go, I like to stagger mine where I run a 9.2 rod off my back corners. I run a 10.6 in the middle, and then Edge makes an 11.6 that I run as a bow rod. And that's just to give me a kind of a triangle spread. It gets all my gear fishing different travel lanes as I'm trolling, and keeps everybody from tangling with each other.
And Shane's dialed. He's got his program very dialed, you know. And for me, it's different. I'm fishing. My boat's, you know, it's huge. If you've seen it outside, it's big. I can get away with fishing all 10'9" rods, and I fish them all throughout the boat, right? And so I like that 10'9". For me, the way I drive my boat, the way I fish, it just helps me fish better. And you know, anything in that 9'2" to 10'6", 11'6", even 12'6" will work. Some rods do fish better than others for a reason. Like I said, we'll go into depth on why and how as we move along. As far as you know, reel goes, line counter is great. I think Shane fishes Daiwas. I fish Shimano's and Ukumas. They're all great. They really make make a good line counter reel now. You just want to make sure that you do have a line counter. Very important for what we're going to talk about here coming up. If the line counters come out, you know, it's like Shane and I. A lot of times we're fishing 7 rods. The most I fished out of my boat at one time was 11. So you fish 11 rods, you need to know where you're at on all of them, right? Even if you're fishing 2 rods or 6 rods, you just need to know where you're at, right? It just kind of gives you that that heads up, especially now with the forward-facing the sonars, you know, to see where those fish are. You know, that guy can say, hey, pull them up to 33 feet. And, you know, you're like, oh, where am I at? Am I out 10 poles, 18 poles, 26 poles? How far was I out? So it's just a precision thing for that. And then as the line goes, I fish 65-pound braid personally on all mine. I fish Power Pro. All the braided line out there is good nowadays. I personally like 65. I know some guys fish 50. I'm not sure if you fish 50 or 65.
I fish 50, and the main reason I fish 50 is sometimes, especially later in the fall, I fish in deep water. And fishing that deep water, I can get the 50 down there a little bit better without having to put so much line out. But the 50 does tend to wear out a little faster. So I do more often throughout the season trim off some line because it's not holding up.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's kind of a preference thing. But it's good to have the same pound line on each one of your reels, because that will create tangles also. If you run a 65 up front and a 50 out the back, and the 50 is more vertical and your 65 is getting more drag, you're going to create more tangles that way. So same line counters, same pound line,
same rods.
Keep things uniform.
Yeah, like Shane fishes different style rods, but each one of the rods in that different lengths has the same action. You got to be careful when you're purchasing rods and you're purchasing different sizes and lengths, because they will have different action with different weights. There's a reason I went with all 10'9" on these X trolls. If I'm fishing the classic Guide Select Classics from Okuma, they're awesome rods too. But I'm fishing a 10'6" model on those because the 10'6" fishes the best for the way I drive my boat and for the 360 fishing. But in this X troll model, the 10'9" fishes the best. And so you really want to look at how it's fishing, right? Like how it fishes before you just go buy a rod to go fishing. It's like, what are you doing? Like, you know, spend your money wisely as you go do these things. So that's what we fish. I fish 65-pound braid. One thing I do notice about, it's like Shane said, I'll be beside Shane. We fish, you know, Nick's fish a lot. I'm like, how deep are you? And we're fishing maybe a 50-foot channel. Shane might be at 65 feet. Well, I might have to go to 72 feet, 70 feet to achieve the same depth just because I'm fishing a little heavier line. And so you have to keep those types of things in mind as well. Now Shane and I both terminate our gear difference. When I say terminate, what that means is the terminal tackle I use to terminate my main line down to my offering or my leader, right? And I've done this for years. It's just something I've always done. I fish a lot more of the lower river and the buoy 10 and the ocean than Shane does. That's another reason for the 65-pound test line, because one, sea lines is my main thing, right? Like I want to have some, you know, some grip, so I can at least maybe get most of this stuff back. But you know, we do this a little bit different. And the reason I do this here is because all the moss and weeds, and if I'm in the ocean, freaking jellyfish, good Lord, I can't stand those things, right? Yeah, it's horrible last year, but the jellyfish thing, right? And so what I found is, like, if you have to clean that off, I always wear gloves anyway, but if you have to clean jellyfish off at all and you don't have it on there, you grab the wrong jellyfish, it hurts, it stings, it burns for a long time. You start rubbing your face and stuff, you get a weird rash. Well, these beads on there, if there's jellyfish on there, at least you can just kind of grab a bead, you can take it like this, and it'll clean it off, right? And this T-bead up here, which is this first thing, it's a little cone shape. It allows, like, for any of that stuff that comes up, it helps it kind of fans it off and lets it drop off, right? So it gives you, it might give you some more time. It might really keep it all off there, but in my experience, like the fishing that I do in that lower river, all that stuff, it may give me more time to get a bite while I'm down there. And the 3 beads, again, are just so I have something to grab to clean it off. Now, the most important piece, I think, to my rigging, which Shane uses these two, is this VIP line lock, right? Now, this piece is very key in what we do, and especially this method of fishing, because it keys in to this bead chain, right? And so what it allows that to do is it allows all this gear that's down here spinning to not spin up my braided line. Because if you get your line, if you ever see your braided line start to twist up your rod, don't keep fishing it.
Yeah.
Like, cut it where, pull it out until you can't see anymore, cut it, and make sure you get something on it that doesn't allow it to twist. Every time braided line folds over itself, it loses its strength by half.
Mm-hmm.
Every time.
It wants to start cutting itself.
It starts cutting itself.
You want to keep that twist out of it as much as possible.
As much, I mean, out of everything on this whole setup, for you to fish it effectively, this almost the cheapest piece in the whole thing is probably one of the most important. Right? And then you can see I terminate down to a bead chain. And then I come, and the bead chain is just because it's all rotating. And then I come down to a bumper. Now, I tie my own bumpers, and there are bumpers out there you can purchase. Bumpers are a big thing Shane and I talk about a lot. Mm-hmm. Length, diameter, all these types of things, right? And my bumper lengths don't change. They're almost always 22.5 inches is my consistent bumper length for everything. I like that for 360s. I like that for my triangles. I like that for everything, right? And then what the bumper length does for you is bumper length dictates the angle that the flasher rotates at, right? And not a lot of people pay attention to this particular portion of this, but these are a game of inches. You know, I've been to Shane's house before, and Shane's just hammering fish. I come in, I've got all my stuff tied up, and he just jumps in my boat, and he'll open it up. He's like, measure it. He's like, this is wrong. I'm like, what do you mean it's wrong? He's like, it's a half inch too long. I'm like,
that's when I start cutting this stuff apart.
And he just grabs scissors out of my boat and starts cutting stuff.
I go, Hunter, where's the scissors?
Yeah, so ask my son, where's the scissors? Like, seriously, he does. But this, and this is where, it makes that much difference. I mean, literally 22.5 inches was my best depth, but that's the way I drive my boat too, which we'll get into. But 22.5 inches is my bumper length. I like something in a 50 to 80 pound test. I like 50 to 80. I'd like to tie my own because I might want a 21.5 inch bumper or a 20.5 inch bumper or a 21 inch bumper or whatever, right? And so it gives me freedom to adjust it. There's a lot of great bumpers out there. Ken makes a really cool cold water strong. He makes a finesse bumper. I think they come in 18 and 24 inches. So if you're going to fish those two particular lengths, which you like, which are great, they both work. I've taught fish on both those. He makes one called a finesse bumper. That's the one I prefer. It's a 110 pound test. The bigger the bumper, as this flasher tries to rotate over, the thicker the bumper is, it's going to start to create a bow as it rolls, right? When it creates a bow, that's force going the other direction. And so it's not going to allow this flasher to achieve what you're trying to get it to do as it rolls over. And the shorter the bumper, quicker the flasher moves. The longer the bumper gets, the less the flasher moves. See that? The bigger your circle gets. That's where bumper length becomes very important, right? Shane, you got anything on bumpers?
Yeah, so Jarod likes to run the same bumpers, the 22.5 inches. And he mentioned Ken from Coldwater Strong. I like to run different bumpers based on what I'm doing. This time of year, we're fishing a lot of fish flashes, bouncing bottom pretty heavy for these early springers. And so I like to run a 15-inch finesse bumper. But what I do is running Ken's bumpers is that I actually just buy two bumpers, and I run a 15-inch for the fish flash and a 15-inch for my dropper. So it's same, and that's my 90-degree equal triangle for bouncing bottom. And then when I move over to running the 360 flashers, if I'm up at the wind or someplace, then I lengthen out to my 22 or 24 inches and go from there. So I do two different lengths versus one, but that's kind of a preference thing. The goal is to adjust your dropper to get this flasher in front of those fish's face if they're right on the bottom.
Mm-hmm. And I will change my bumper length, but my overall best one is 22.5. That's just generally where I start. Now, as we come down, we'll do two different setups here. And Shane just talked about the fish flash, right? Or your triangle style flashers. Now, you can see I got 22.5 inch bumper on this one too. The reason I do that is again, if I want to change, which I'll tell you when and why I change the 360s during the day, I don't have to change bumpers. I can just snap a 360 onto that and go. But I like the same thing. Bumper, 22-inch bumper on this one, and then an 8-inch fish flash, sometimes 6s if the water's really clear, if the water's really dirty. I like 10-inch fish flash, even for springers, right? Because you're looking for flash. That's the whole idea is it's flasher, right? It's a flasher.
They like those 10-inch fish flashes, especially in the dirty water, like what Willamette's puking out right now.
They like those big ones.
Yeah. Having that bigger flasher is not a bad thing.
It's not. And, I've even seen guys run double flashers. You guys have seen that. I've seen guys catch fish on them. Your leader length, depends on really your water clarity for me, right? That's really what dictates my leader length. Your general 3 to 5, 6 feet of visibility in the Columbia, I'm fishing probably 42 to 48 inches. that water drops below that, 3 foot, ish visibility where it's a little murky, a little cloudy, I might drop it to 30, 32 inches, right? Because I want it close to this flasher. I want them to be able to see this, And, talking about the two types of flashers is, fish flash is an attractor, right? Fish flash is just designed to rotate on its own axis, just like that, just rotate on its own axis. It gives you about 1 blink per second at your trolling speed. And it sends out balls of light that attract into the fish, makes fish think there's a bait ball, right? So they're coming in to check out a bait ball and see what's behind the bait ball. That's where they see your offering and they take it. Now, the 360 style flashers, what they do is they're an actionizer. So you've got an attractor and you got an actionizer, right? This thing is not only putting action in the bait, but if you think about this, if I got 7 rods and I'm rolling them all through the Columbia, right, and they're all doing this down there, there's a salmon down there, it looks up, it looks like a bunch of salmon cutting through each other, diving for bait, right? So it's an actionizer, and that's what I think this represents is it represents feeding salmon, and so it triggers a more of a feeding response, right, and gets them a little juiced up, and so that's the real difference between the two flashers once we stop at that point before we go on to what we put behind them.
And moving on with those style of flashers, what you're going to find also is, down here we really fish the different tides. Low tide, high tide, you hear that talked about a lot based on your bite times. Well, this can play with what flashers you run. Don't be afraid to run the 360 flasher in the lower river or the fish flash both in tandem. And what I find is when I fish down here a lot is the harder the tide runs and the harder the current is, the more stuck those fish are to the bottom. And
Yes.
So I'll run more of the fish flash during those times, really dragging the bottom. But when you get in those tide changes and you get more slack and the current lets up, those fish will come up off the bottom some, and they're a little go and grab stuff. And so switching over and maybe running a couple 360 flashers and a couple fish flash and keeping them, a half a crank to a crank off the bottom and not digging right in the dirt can be real effective. So, switching back and forth between the two based on where you're at in the tide is super effective.
One of the most asked questions I get, and I'm going to answer this, is when do you switch from triangles to 360s? It's not a water temp thing. It's not a year timing thing. It's a tide thing, right? For me, it's a tide thing.
Absolutely.
And so our plan, when I go out each day and I'm going to go springer fishing in this lower river, I will generally 90% of the time, I'll start fishing triangles, and they'll all be, like Shane said, on the deck, right? I like them on the deck. And as I'm doing that and I'm finding my lanes, right? And what I do, a lot of years, it changes out there. And so when I get out, the first thing I do when I start trolling, I get my baits out, I get everything ready, and I've already got everything I needed, and I drop my gear down, I start fishing. I'm watching my finder, and I'm looking to see for shelves, points, eddies, different things, and depth contour. So if I start on a 40-foot line and I want to stay there, I'll start trolling that 40-foot line, and I'll start putting X's on my mark every so often. And if I get into 33 feet, I'll scoot back out to 40 and I'll hit an X. And I'll do it in 30 feet unless I hit a fish, and I'll do it in 20 feet. And so the next time I want to go back through there, I know if I want to troll 40, 30, or 20 feet, I've got these lanes marked. Because if you just leave your trail, your track, eventually it gets lost, right? You get lost in the spaghetti. But those X's will always be there. Your waypoints will always be there. So you can mark these travel lanes, right? And that's really important for this style of fishing. So as I'm marking these travel lanes and I'm going through there, right? And maybe I don't get bit because I'm looking at these fish. As you notice, like we're fishing those areas with those big humps, right? You see those big humps and those drop-offs. You always see those damn fish stuck behind it, and they will not come up and bite, right? Until, like, what does everybody say? Right before or right after tide change, right? That's when they bite. They just sit there on the deck. But that's why we fish this method. That's why we're using the triangles, right? Because that gives us the opportunity to get in there and get those. Now, what I found, and I learned this from him, is when you're trolling in that situation, a lot of people say you can't get those fish behind the humps, but you can. The way we do that is just what we talked about, the line counters. If Shane tells me, hey, bud, go 25 in the bow, 26 in the middle, and 27 out the back, right? That's exactly what we're going to do. Well, then after that, he knows what he's doing. He's already marked this. He already knows where his area is. He knows his lane. And so all we're going to do is we're going to feather ourselves right up to there. You'll see every now and then, you'll see your stuff tick, right? And you'll notice as you're coming up on that hump, you can see the hump. You'll see all your weights kind of start ticking a little bit more. We'll just speed up a little bit, lift them. And as soon as that first one crests that hump, you slow them down, and then you can drop them all.
Let them drop right in front of their face.
You can drop it right in front of their face. And so don't just think you can motor downhill and just, you're trolling your lane, right? No. The guy driving the boat, work the boat. Work the gear. Pay attention to all your customers. Like, You know, hey, or customers or family, friends, or whoever's in there, but you know, hey, reel up 2 feet, everybody up 2 feet, everybody down 2 feet, everybody down 3 feet. You one crank up, half crank here, work your gear. These early springers like this, work your gear. You have to, nonstop, all day. That's how you get the ones behind it, behind those hills. Now,
because they'll bite all through that tide. It's just a matter of getting that cut plug or that spinner or whatever you're running in front of their face. Springers are typically a snappy fish out of all the salmon. They're snappy. They want to feed, but you got to get it in front of their face. And one of the other techniques that really helps to get those fish that are behind those humps is a diagonal troll. I mean, obviously, if you're in a crowded area where you're cutting people off, that's not good. But if you're in an area where it's a little more open, you can, instead of just trolling straight downhill and speeding up and slowing down to drop behind those humps, you control at a diagonal, and also that gear will slide behind those humps as you go over.
Yes.
So that's, and come in front of their face and get them to snap. So there's couple different ways to get those fish that are, you know, hitting the bottom really tight when the tide's running hard. And one of the biggest things I can say is don't be afraid to drag your gear a little bit. And that's what I see a lot is everybody tries to always stay up off the bottom and not drag. And on these springers, don't be afraid to let that ball drag in the mud a little bit and you see your rod ticking along. As long as you've got that bumper on there, you'll be dropping it in front of those fish's face.
Yep. And, you know, the 360, you know, talking about leads. Now, leads are very important, right? Like a lot of times I fish the same size leads throughout my entire presentation. Again, I've got 7 of the same rods fishing, 7 of the same reels with 7 of the same line, with 7 of the same beads, setup, flashers, everything, right? And so I can see all my rhythm and what's going on. And sometimes I will start with different leads. If I have people that I don't know how to fish very well, or maybe I'm fishing fairly deep, or these types of situations where I will. And if I start out with, you know, just say for instance, 12s in the front, 10s in the middle, 8s in the back, and, you know, 6s out or in my back, and then 6 in my rod that's over the back of my motors. And I noticed that my 10-ounce rods are the only ones firing all day. They just keep firing. I will switch to 10-ounce leads on almost everything because that dictates my line entry angle. What I mean by line entry angle is whatever angle this is hanging at. If I'm running a 20-ounce lead, this thing's hanging off the boat like this, right? And it's just doing this. See my line? Oops. Nice, I got the carpet. But this is my line entry angle. See what it does to the flasher, right? Like this lead is going to be right here. Flasher's straight behind it, just like this, right? So it's working just like this. Now, as your lead lightens up, it lengthens this out, and it gives your line angle a different entry into the water. Does that make sense? And so, like anything else, like when you're trying to line something up to get it to fit, a lot of times things will only fit one way. Anybody that's ever put in a transmission knows there's one way. It goes in there. Same with this, right? When you find where it fits, if they're biting all 10s, and that's your line entry angle, your lead is part of your presentation. Don't be afraid to change leads to match, right? Don't be afraid to do that because that is very important. That line entry angle is what those fish are dictating that day. That's how they want to see it. They're not just biting it because it's in the middle of the boat. They're not biting it. That could be, it could be just that bait was perfect. It's spun by in the right spot. But if your 10s are the only ones firing and everything else is fishing and basically the same, switch leads.
And that holds same true on the fish flashes.
Yes.
Little story to throw in there. I was with a buddy of mine a few years back fishing Cathlamet and trolling fish flashes in about 15 foot of water on the flat outside of Tennessee Island. And he was running a 4-ounce lead ball and I was running a 6-ounce lead ball. We were both tapping bottom, dragging sideways along this flat, and he caught his fish. His son caught his fish off his rod. His buddy caught his fish off his rod. And my rod never got bit. And the only thing we were doing different, I was running a 6-ounce and he was running a 4. And as soon as I switched over to 4-ounce and stuck it out a little further and drug the bottom the same, I caught my fish. And it was just how the bumper space, dragging on the bottom, and line angle behind the boat was that it was dragging properly in front of those fish. And it was just all, it was about the lead ball. Yep. So, like I said, don't be afraid to play with that and change it out.
You know, and like I said, when you're trolling on those downhills, you know, we didn't talk about bait much. We'll get into all that here in a minute, but we're just talking about, you know, your techniques on how you get there. You all know we're fishing herring, we're fishing a spinfish, we're fishing a cut plug, right? I mean, that's what we're fishing in this lower river. But, you know, when I'm seeing those fish and I see them stacked up behind those humps and I'm doing everything I can and I can't get them to go, again, I've marked my lanes, right? Like I know where they're sitting. I know where they're at. So that tide starts to slip up, it starts to slack up. That's when I switch to 360s. Not a temperature thing, it's a tide thing. So when that tide starts to slow up, just like Shane said, and those fish, you start seeing them start to suspend, that's when you can go to 360s, right? And really start to target those fish. And the cool thing is, you'll see me do this a lot out there, and you'll think, who is this asshole? But I troll sideways, right? And when I was out in the ocean one year, and me and my son and some friends were trolling for coho, and we were trolling just like this, kind of back and forth in this line, and smoking them, just one after another, boom, 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 and an hour and a half goes by, and we're culling them out, kicking them back, and we're catching, 5 or 10 every few minutes or whatever, or every half hour, and we're kicking them back, trying to keep big ones, and all of a sudden they stop biting. I'm like, well, hell, and I have my marks. I'm like, and we're in 400 feet of water. The school was right there. I'm like, well, I know they're here still. And I was like, what's going on? And I'm looking down, and I'm driving straight at the sun, right, with these flashers, right, and and they're 15 to 20 feet down. I can see the flasher. I see no reflection. I can see the flasher, but it's not popping. So I start turning my boat, right, and where this flasher now is facing into the sun. So I start turning my boat to where this flasher starts going sideways to the sun, and you see how much different flash it is? Huh. Never thought of something that simple. As your kids, you got mirrors, you're reflecting, doing the whole thing. That's what this is. It's a flasher. You want the most light you can get out of it, right? And so don't be afraid to turn your boat to the angle of the sun, right? Like in those situations in that tide where you can start trolling cross current and get a different presentation. Give them a different look. Let your flasher do what it's supposed to do. Flash, right? So that's a pretty key tip for that. And that's exactly what I do when those tides slack. That's why I have a 22.5-inch bumper. I'll have these rigged. They're all ready to go right in the side. I'll simply just take them out and snap it off. You can see I have chain beads on everything here, right? I have them usually on my herring leader too. And I'll just snap a herring leader right on there. Herring leader behind that, if you're running a herring on that, and it's a 36 to 40 inch leader, perfect. That's what I run behind a 360, 36 to 40 inch leaders on a herring. Or if you run an anchovy hood, our new cut plugs, spinning fish, whatever, works perfect. You can just switch it right now and just fish, right? And that's what I do. I just simply change flashers. I change flashers, I unsnap my dropper, and I snap the lead direct. You can leave the dropper on. I've noticed in a couple of fisheries that leaving the dropper on does help, only if I'm fishing super slow. And I'll explain that when we get to the upper river stuff. But that's literally like the when you want to switch to 360s is a tide thing. It has nothing to do with temperature. Mm-hmm. It has to do with tide. That's it. And so you want to switch to 360 and start doing that and troll crossways. Troll up and down. See where you mark those fish on those lines that I was telling you about, right? And at that point in time, you don't have to be all of them on the deck. Bow rod's 18 feet, middle rod's 25 feet, back rod's 30 feet, right? Because those fish are lifted up because now they're moving. They're not bucking the current, they're moving. And so now you can catch those fish running sideways or doing whatever. But don't be afraid to do that. I mean, don't get out there and think you have to just do this and this and this and this and this and this and this, right? You can change it, but that's when you want to change. Now, as far as that goes, like what are we putting behind these things when we're doing that? Like, a herring is a great start. Everyone fishes a herring, right? Cut plug or hole, you want to use a helmet. I've caught them all those ways. My personal favorite when I'm fishing a herring, cut plug. I love a cut plug. I like a green label cut plug. That's kind of my deal, especially in this water. If the water was lower and clearer, like we had last year, really low clear water, I'd fish red label cut plugs, smaller hooks. But this year, green label should probably work just fine if you're going to fish a herring. Now, I have a PowerPoint presentation, but they didn't have a slide. So I'll give you my email after this. Get my email because I have a herring recipe for you. I have 2 tuna recipes for you for stuffer baits, and I also have a prawn recipe for you for curing your own coon shrimp. So after this, make sure I'll give you my email. You guys can all type it down, email me or whatever, and I'll respond back and I'll send you that information for the bait. But what are we putting behind these things? The herring, like I said, that's the one. Now, when you're choosing your herring, which is very important when you're choosing bait, is you want to look for trays that are nice, flat, not smashed, no blood, all scales intact, no cloudy eyes all clear, right? It's very important because each one, and you got to look at those scales, each one of those scales as that bait rolls over is a reflective point. And so if you're picking bait that's inferior, they've been out in the ocean eating these things for years, right? So they're going to notice that. And so take time picking your bait. Don't just pick a tray of bait and go get good bait. When you cure your bait, it says a lot of times, like on Shane's baits right here, it tells you how much water to use, right? My suggestion is wherever you're going fishing, get water from there. If I'm going to Cathlamet, I'll wait till I get there. Do not get it out of the marina. Drive your boat out into the water, get the water out there, and bring it back. Now, some guys just like to use ice in water and some rock salt, maybe a couple drops of anise in a cooler. That's another way guys cure herring. If you're going to use ice, make ice out of the river water that you just got. Right? Again, we're taking every precaution out. Any variable that we don't have, we're taking it out of the equation so that we know that we're fishing clean. You fish clean, you fish with confidence, you catch more fish.
that water you're using, whether it's the river water or tributary water, they all have different pH levels in them, and that's a huge thing. And people don't think a lot about that, but that pH level is a big piece on why these fish find where they're going back to.
That's what they imprint on.
So it's natural to them. It's going to be natural to them, and it's going to be natural on a bait to them. Where if you start using water out of a tap or something different source, you're going to make that bait different than what they used to, and they may shy away from it. So that's a huge source, but something to remember when you do use water out of a river, your brine isn't going to last as long. And being a guy that makes these brines and fishes them on a regular basis, you get 2 to maybe 3 days out of a brine out of river water, where if you did use distilled, you would get longer. So that's something to keep in mind, is you're going to have to change out your brine a little faster to keep your bait fresh and right.
Yep. The bait's important. I mean, you've already got your boat, your gas, your fuel, license, expensive rods, reels, all this gear, all this time, right? Like your last piece of your puzzle, make sure it's the right one. Make sure it's a good one, right? Like take your time with that, and make sure you do that. And if you're curing your bait, one thing I found with brines is sometimes you might make it a little too hot, and you'll see them start to shrivel a little bit. If they shrivel just a little bit, don't worry about it too much, right? Like when you cut plug it and you put it in the water, it will rehydrate and it will juice back up.
And you can add a little water to the brine,
add a little water
and it'll plump back up right there in the brine. It's all about the salt content in that brine. And where you see that a lot, and something we don't talk about, is anchovies also work really well for springers. Great. But anchovies don't take as much brine, and they will shrivel up fast. So don't be afraid to run an anchovy also.
No. On your herring, if you're running different sizes, you heard me talk about that. Now, if I'm running strictly a herring and not one of our cut plugs or a plastic bait, I never use anything above a 25-pound test for herring itself. That's me personally, right? And the reason being is because that herring, you're trying to get it to rotate at the slowest speed possible as you're trolling downhill with the current, right? And so your ideal situation is you're going downhill is to go as slow as you possibly can and still let that bait be able to turn. If you're running like a 40-pound test, or even like some of the thicker 30-pound tests, a lot of times that's a lot of extra weight for that bait to be able to turn over. You got to remember, it's a small bait trying to turn that over. You got too big of hooks in there and too big a leader, your bait's not going to spin very well. And so I like a 25-pound test leader, even a 20 in some situations for springers. If I'm really finesse fishing with a red label, I really want to slow my presentation down, the water's really clear, I'll really thin down to even a 20-pound test, right? And so leader diameter for your herring is very important, because it also the hooks, right? And so hooks, I get hook spacing and hook sizing questions a lot. And the way I've taught everybody to do this, right, is a green label herring, you want basically, or a blue label herring is about the biggest one we use, right, ever. And a blue label, I like my hooks spaced 4 fingers apart, right? And that reminds me, 4/0. So when I'm using a blue label, 4/0, 4 fingers. That's my hook spacing. If I'm using a green label, I use 3 finger spacings and 3/0 hooks. If I'm using a red label, I use 2 finger spacing and 2/0 hooks. And if I'm using a yellow label or smaller, then you can get the idea, right? But that's the best way to remember.
His fingers are bigger than most of ours.
I was just going to say that. I have hot dogs for hands, and so you may not want to go exactly by that, but that's a good rule of thumb, right? But that also gives you not only the correct hook size for the bait you're using, but it gives you the correct hook spacing between, so that when you cut plug it, your hooks are at the right space. If you have a hook trailing out too far out the back of the bait, it's not going to work right? Because you're adding weight on the end. It's just like if you have a short 2x4 and you hold it here, you can hold it forever. Get yourself a 20-foot 2x4, hold it right here. I think it's real heavy on the end real quick, and you start losing your composure. Same as your bait will. Your bait will lose its composure if you overweight it. Make sense? Okay. Same with all the rest of the stuff we're going to talk about. Does anybody have any questions about herring fishing in general, or herring brining your baits, or any of that type of stuff? Anybody have any questions on any of those types of things? Anybody have any questions on triangle flashers fishing for herring? Or fishing, yes?
My question is, does it help to put like another set of bead between, bead chain between the hook and the...
So I do that sometimes. That's a great question. On those days where I'm really trying to fish as slow as I can, and I'm trying to get that bait to rotate, I will put not necessarily a bead chain, because again, I'm looking at weight, right? A bead chain's pretty hefty, but I will put a P-line, Sampo. They make some really good, very small high ball bearing swivels that you can put in there that are very light, that aren't going to affect as far as the weight and the presentation, but it will aid in allowing the bait to rotate over itself easier. Yes. The problem you have with that is if you fish with a lot of weeds and grass, you're going to get the weeds and grass in that thing too. Yep, and it sucks. So that's what I use all that stuff up there for. Yes.
On your dropper link, you're using bumpers on your droppers. Now, are you concerned about that weight getting hung up, not being able to break the bumper?
You know, so I used to be, yes. I used to be super concerned about that. I'd run like 15-pound test as my bumper leader. And then after all the years of dragging bottom out here and fishing all our spots, other than like the Multnomah Channel, which is snaggy, but most of the Columbia, I rarely get snagged up. And so I finally just went to the stiffer bumper because I find the stiffer bumper keeps a little better 90-degree angle, and that flasher off the bottom when it's ticking instead of folding over underneath itself, and it tangles up a lot less. So I don't worry about it as much unless you know you are fishing a snaggy area where you need to break off that bumper, which I don't know. I fish the Columbia a bunch, and I rarely
The only couple of snags I have in the Columbia are down in what we call a 62 to 72 troll down that Kalama area. There's a few snags that are in there that I found, and they're big red X's. Like I told you, mark them. Because then when you're going down there, you're like, whoa, left turn, Clyde, right? You can go around it. So
there's a couple along the island straight across from the Kalama Marina. There's a couple snags on the tail end of that island.
Yes, there are. There's one huge one.
Yeah, that's.
But I've caught a lot of fish right there too.
Yeah, that's a good one to mark and fish behind.
Yes, yes sir.
So,
we talked a lot about trolling and how this is happening. What happens if you're fishing on the anchor?
Okay, we're gonna get that too. So the times that we do fish on the anchor. So if you got those situations, especially like if the water's higher, I fish on the anchor a lot, right? I like that because what that does is when that water's higher and you want to fish on anchor, right now, well, fish are everywhere. They could be in 60 feet, they could be in 6 feet. When that water gets high, they are in 6 feet. They're in 10 feet, 12 feet maybe, right? And so when we fish on the hook, I'll fish things like a maglip or flatfish is what I fish. M2 flatfish is one of your best springer plugs ever, right? And so we fish those. Now, if I was going to do that, say, and the water's high and I was trying to troll and I couldn't do that, so I'm going to anchor fish, right? So how do I even do that? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to find a spot to anchor. And what I like to do is if I'm anchor fishing for these fish, I like to find a bend or points. My best luck has been this is why I tell you to grid your stuff off, right? Like to mark these things because you got 30 or 40, 30, 20, and it's gridded off of those X's, and you're going to go anchor fish. Well, you're like thinking, well, this is a pretty consistent, deal. Well, this area looks pretty good. So you can slide up in there and, look and start looking in 8, 10 feet of water, and you go down through there and all of a sudden you see this little swoop, right? That's where you want to fish. That's where you want to fish. You either want to fish myself. I like fishing to where I can drop my stuff out. I can walk it back and walk it over that lip because they're going to come up and they're going to sit there, right? If they're busting around it, more likely they're going to bust around it and go. But they're going to stack behind it on those outgoes. And so that's where I like to do it. Now, if I do that, it's very similar to what Shane has rigged here for a dropper, right? Depending on what style of plug I'm using, I'll run anywhere from a 24 to a 48-inch dropper. Now, if I'm running a 24-inch dropper, that means I'm fishing something like a flatfish or a quick fish, right? Flatfish and quick fish are what we call mid divers. They're not a deep diving plug. They're meant to have speed tolerance and action, right? Plugs are designed to do two things. They're designed to wiggle. They're designed to dive. That's it. They have no other form in life. That's it. That's the only energy they have, right? And so if I'm going to be anchor fishing, just like he said, and I'm anchor fishing and the tides stay a little heavier, right? I'm going to fish a plug with more speed tolerance, like a maglet or like a quick, right? Or even a killer fish. Those all fish good in those speedier waters, faster outgoes, right? When that tide starts to slack up and you notice that your rods go from doing this to doing this, that's where your flatfish shine, okay? That's where you don't have to pull anchor and find some place else to fish. This is where tools for your toolbox help you out. That's where a flatfish is designed as a slow trolling, wide wiggling lure. And so in those situations where you have a half a mile an hour or 1 mile an hour current, the flatfish will still work. And that's where you want to be able to switch your tools in your toolbox, right? And so M2s, T50s are outstanding. Double treble is by far my #1 color. Anything chartreuse and green, great for your anchor fishing type stuff. Do I wrap them? Yes, I wrap my plugs. I wrap them with either tuna bellies or tuna in the can. Do I add scent to them? 100%. I usually use the sand shrimp one that Shane makes here. Is my number one. If I could drink it, I would, because I love this stuff. It is awesome. I put this in every tuna fish bait. I put this on my steelhead stuff. This stuff goes in every brine I ever do. It is awesome. The salmon scent, tuna belly, all those are great, right? So add that stuff to them if you're anchor fishing, especially higher water, because higher water means those particles of scent get dissolved a lot quicker. They get spread out a lot faster. And so more scent's not going to hurt you in that situation. I do target, like I said, 5 to 15 feet of water. I do try to find some sort of structure, ledge, or edge that I can fish on.
And something to really add on that, when you're running those plugs, if you're in that less than 15, 16 foot of water, and you're running your mag lips and the tide's running hard, a lot of times you don't need any lead or dropper on.
Or diver.
Just fly or just flatline them.
Yep.
But if you're running the flat fish and you're either in that shallow water or you're, say you get out in deeper water, that's where you want to start running a dropper off of them. And you want to play with that dropper. And I play anywhere from about 12 to 18 inches on my dropper. And then I run 4.5 to 5 feet on my plug.
Yes.
And so then you bounce it back, and you want to get that perfect bounce to it, to where it's going to dig in the mud a little bit, pop up, walk side to side, dig, pop up, walk side to side, and trigger those fish. The other thing that works really well out there, and why I have a diver on this, is I'll run a diver with the same dropper scenario, 12 to 18 inches, and then I run these new cut plugs a lot instead of a plug. And I run the same leader lengths as I do running behind the flashers, whatever I have tied up, 42, 46 inches. And I'll clip those on, stuff them with bait, and run them back there. And as long as that diver is down there balking on the bottom, that thing's down there fishing also. So also a very effective anchor way.
And if you have a boat that's, for whatever reason, I call them dancing boats. Like for whatever reason, when you anchor that thing up, it just sways like hell no matter what you do. Put 5-gallon buckets out, straighten your motors, doesn't matter, still moves. So you have a hard time anchor fishing. Divers are the way to go, because you can put those divers out and they hover with you. So you're always fishing clean, right? And so
I love divers.
I love divers too.
As long as you get away with it around crowds, I love divers, because they'll sit down there and they will cover ground and walk with the bottom with you instead of being in stationary spot. Sometimes when that tide slacks up, the diver isn't grabbing enough to be on bottom, so you got to change it out. But if you can get away with divers, I love
100%.
divers.
And the good thing about the diver, it's set up on the same thing. So if your diver stopped working, you simply reel in, you snap on a lead, and you back bounce it down. Now, lead, again, is important in this situation. You want your lead for whatever plug it's going to be, because if you switch from an M2 to a K15, right, that's a lot more drag that K15 has in an M2 flatfish. And so you may have to adjust your lead. You want your lead so that when you drop it down, you feel it hit bottom. Most of the time I cast them, right, as far back as I can get it. When it hits bottom, you want that tension. You can feel it, right? You want that tension, and you want to be able, if you lift it up and you feed a little line, that lead picks up and walks back. Boom, boom, right? Like that's what you want. You don't want to be able to pick it up and just set it down, pick it up and set it down, because what happens is that current, if your lead's stuck on the bottom and you're anchored, it starts putting a bow in your line, right? It puts a bow in it and it's pushing it. And so it's not letting your rod's doing this weird stuff, right? Because it's got that bow. There's no direct connect, to where if you have a lead light enough that the plug picks it up and sets it down for you, then it's constantly working. So that plug, like Shane said, it'll pick that lead up all of a sudden, and it'll set it back down. The good thing about being able to do that and your lead being in balance with your lure is that a lot of times that lure will find its own spot. Right. And what I mean by that is, if it's sitting up here and you back it down and it's sitting up on top of that shelf that you looked at, right, but it keeps pushing itself back, with that round ball, eventually it'll work its way into that little hole, right? And so every time you let line out, again, you've got a line counter, you look at, okay, I'm 108 feet, right? No bite for 10 minutes. You walk it back a little bit, just reset it, drop it down, okay, I'm 117 feet. Your rod folds. Next time, that you need to be at 117 feet. That's the travel lane, right? That's where it's at. So that's where the line count is important. So that's where kind of all that stuff lines up for anchor fishing. Does that answer your question? Might have went a little too far. Again, we go down the rabbit hole sometimes, but
yeah. We're good at rabbit holes.
Oh yeah, I get excited. So, but that, yes.
On the herring, do you use strictly mono, or do you use fluorocarbon?
I use mono. I mean, I'll use fluoro sometimes, but most time I use mono. I use 30-pound or 25-pound Maximum Ultra Green. P-Line makes a great one.
I really like, for running cupplug herring, I really like the P-Line Fluoro Clear.
Fluoro Clear is great.
It's soft, and I usually run 25-pound, and I can take a small cut plug like a Red Label, and it'll turn over that 25-pound fluoro clear really well. So it's not too stiff.
Mhm.
So I really like that. I don't use the fluoro clear for a lot of my other leaders, but for herring fishing, it's great.
So any more questions kind of on that? That's kind of covering like how we would look at everything in this early season, lower river stuff. Like I said, Ridgefield, the kind of the Cathlamic, kind of all those in between. That's really how we're going to target all of those, areas. Very similar as we get up above Bonneville or up above that Ridgefield and that Bonneville area. We're doing a lot of the same stuff. The difference that I find with myself is, and it's not prawn spinners would work down that lower river, 100%. But my brain just says herring or cut plug or spin fish, right? That's just how I work. And so, I might switch those techniques and start doing a prawn spinner as we get up there, right? Because prawn spinner is one of the most effective things we've seen for, Chinooks in a long time. And, prawn spinners can be rigged, hundreds of different ways. They can be ran behind a triangle. They can be ran behind a 360. But, we've talked about our herring, which is one of our, very key ways to do this. We've talked about our cut plug, which can be used from here anywhere we talk about upriver. And we've talked about spinning fish a little bit. Now, the spinning fish, for you guys that don't know much about the spinning fish, or if you do, it's a lot like the cut plug, right? It breaks apart right in the middle, and it's a cool tool. It breaks apart just like that, stuff it full of bait. This is my number one color right here. I call this corn chowder. Yes, I name all the lures. Yes, I'm a little bit off, but that's what happens. But this one here has been my number one by far. Now, why would I have all these different presentations, right? Like you see, I got spin fish, I got cut plugs, and I got prawn spinners, but again, it's tools for your toolbox. Well, the reason Shane designed this was because, one, he was just tired of only thing you could troll downhill and actually do it right at a slow speed was a cut plug herring. So that's why he designed this thing, is because this thing will start at 0.8 miles per hour. So now I have this tool for being able to troll downhill, right, and get it to spin always. It's always spinning, 0.8 miles per hour. And so you don't have to worry about how you cut it, how you do this, if it's cut right, if you got to take the guts out, if the hook's the right size, the leader's the right size, doesn't matter. This thing will run, right? And so that's why he designed that. He was tired of that game we were playing. And
and trying to make a herring double trouble was really difficult.
It was difficult.
I had to dip the thing and
Flip it.
I like colors. I mean, especially when that river gets dirty, I like colors. And so
100%.
having something with some flash and color down there.
It does. And and again, but this allows us to slow down. Now, again, if I pick up and I'm going to start, moving around like I told you, that tide change. Well, one thing about the spinning fish, if you don't know this, if you ever have issues catching fish on these or whatever, speed up. That's the deal. Like whatever your normal speed is, 1/4 mile an hour, 1/2 mile an hour, faster than that. And that's where the spin fish shines. And so in those situations when you're going to cover water and you're going what I call hunting, like you just want to cover some water and look, put on some spin fish, speed troll. And you can see this one I got here. I added a hoochie on the back of this thing, right? I just a tinsel fly from VIP and then just a simple hoochie right over the top of it, right? I just put that right over my hook, a bead, and then I put another bead between the two. And I will fish this like this if the river is the color it is now or dirtier. If it cleans up, I don't put the hoochie on most of the time unless I fish a smaller one, like a 2 or 2.5 inch, just for a profile size, right? But that's where these shine, is you can speed up with them, right? Now the prawn spinners, you can do both. You can fish those super slow, or you can fish them fairly fast, right? And so they fall into both categories. So that's why we have all these rigged up here, is because it allows us to be more versatile in the water. When I go out, I've got 16 rods in the boat. They're all rigged, right? And I've got all this stuff ready to go. It's all pre-tied just like this, right? And so we can just snap whatever on and change our presentation immediately, because you have to be able to change. That's most of my seminars. I tell everybody, if you're not willing to change and change stuff up all day, you're in the wrong one, because that's what you do all day. If you're fishing 7 rods, 8 rods or whatever, you got time to test all this stuff and look at it, but you got to have it all running right, because you tangle up 7 rods and it sucks. It is not fun. So as we come up river and we start changing, looking at presentations and what we're going to use and how we're going to do this, I mean, are we 360s or are we triangles? Yeah, both. Fish them both. Whatever you feel comfortable with, fish them both. I will tell you this, speed is another question I get asked a lot. What speed? Your rods tell you the speed. Don't look at your speed over ground, doesn't matter, right? Put your gear in the water after you're rigged up, look at it. And what I do with mine is I look at my rod, I look at my rod angle as I set it in the water, and I look down there and I see what my rod angle is it's exactly as it would sit in the holder, and I look at how that herring's spinning, or as my cut plug spinning or whatever. This is with a fish flash, right? And then I'm able to deploy it. I know exactly what my motor sounds like going downhill. I know all that stuff, right? And so that's my speed, is my rod angle. And then like Shane said, once you get all the rods same, and you start going downhill, you'll know if you're going too slow, because your rods are going to be hitting the bottom going, blah, 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 blah. right? If you're going too fast, your gear's never touching bottom. It's a fine mixture, right? You're working your gear. So that's your speed. Now, your speed with a 360 flasher, if you're Shane, it's almost reverse, right?
I like to go slow.
So slow.
Mhm.
But he limits so fast. I just don't have that kind of patience, right? Like I move faster, I troll faster. And the reason I tell you this is because this is why he changes bumper sizes and different things. I've found for my boat, the way I troll my boat, the way I fish, this is by far the most effective method for me. You could probably all go out there, do exactly 22.5-inch bumpers. My leaders for all my stuff is mostly 31.5 inches behind a 360, except for herring. 31.5, 32 inches roughly, right? You could all get the exact same stuff and go right beside me, and you can probably catch, 1 or 2 or 3 fish throughout the day. I may limit out. But if you start thinking like we're thinking, like we're talking to you about these things, and you start saying, oh man, 20.5-inch bumpers in my boat's what works good. 25.5 is my good, looks good. And mine are 32-inch leaders or 37-inch leaders, whatever it is, right? Start figuring that out. This stuff is dialed in for my program, right? For my program. These are all good measurements, like everything we're going to give you, but really take this to note in your boat. Like make it your program. Don't run mine, run yours.
And if you get, you get up into the upper river, what we call Wind and Drano, or up in the Willamette a little more, and you're targeting these fish, and you're deciding, between Fish Flash and Pro Trolls, and obviously the 360 flasher has taken over the game in a lot of those places. I still use the same rule of thumb in those places as I use in the lower river. If you got dirty, hard running water up there at the Wind or in the Willamette, running a bigger blade on your prawn spinner, such as a number 4 Hildebrand or a bigger mulky blade that your Pro Troll can't roll over because the blade's bigger, but you need that bigger blade for the fish to see in that dirty water. This is where running the Fish Flash and running it down on the bottom in those fisheries with that bigger blade super effective. That 360 flasher only turns over so much weight behind it. And that is effective in typically cleaner water and softer water where those fish will get up and travel around and they can see stuff. And so, evaluate your water conditions, and don't always sell out on one thing. Be willing to be like, hey, I got some dirtier water here. It's running pretty hard. I see 25 boats all fishing Pro Trolls, but nobody's getting a bite. Maybe I should take and put on a bigger blade and bounce the bottom a little harder. Maybe these fish just can't see what those guys are running, and keep that in your mind as you're running out there. Yeah.
Now your flasher colors, you guys are particular on cloudy days, sunny days, on
Yes.
color.
So actually, this is a really good example on what we have actually sitting out here. When you get into those cloudy days or early mornings, stuff that stands out is going to be your solid colors, this moon jelly color stuff that's going to grab light and show up. But as the day goes on, maybe it gets sunny or the water's cleaner. This is where your flashers that are going to have shine to them, they have good shine to them, or your chromes that are going to catch that sunlight and send out that flash in the water. So I play with that the flasher color based on time of day, clarity of water, and how dark the day is. Now, typically, when it comes to running the 360 flashers, we really like the chrome blades. Anything on that chrome blade tends to always work, but then we play with what tape we put on that chrome blade.
Mm-hmm.
If it's middle of the day, sun high, clear day, just running the chrome works fantastic with a little bit of shiny green. But if you get into a dark day, running that chrome blade with a solid tape on it of chartreuse or green or something that's going to grab light in those lower light conditions can be very effective.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, me personally, like Shane's I'm pretty particular about all that stuff, but he's like next level, like, Dr. Finkelstein way up there. So me, I run literally these 3 flashers all year long for Pro Trolls. These 3. I run the chrome one, I run this chrome one with chartreuse on it, and this one's brand new, and I will run this thing all year too because it's awesome. But other than that, I run these 2 99% of the time. But Fish Flash, I do change a lot. But these things here, I don't change them as much as I probably should, but I catch fish on them. So he is more like, I want breakfast, and so I need to limit out by 9. I'm more like, I want to barbecue at noon and be home by 2. So that's kind of how we do it.
I like naps.
He likes naps. He does. I hate it. Every morning, 9 o'clock, all I look over, he goes, I'm going to go take a nap. I'm like, all right. See you in a couple hours. So, you know, and so as we get up here to the, you know, these areas, we're targeting the same type of stuff, you know, from this ridge field up, right? And even like if you go fish the Multnomah Channel at all, which I do, the only thing that I really change about my setup in the Multnomah Channel is I'll run like a 20-inch dropper, and I will put it at 15-pound test off of my, just like Shane, you know, he has his heavy dropper. I'll run a 20-inch dropper. Reason being is the Multnomah Channel has a ton of stuff down there. I don't know what's down there, bikes or what, I have no idea, cars, but you snag a lot of crap in that thing. And so being able to have a 20-inch bumper will allow you to, at least as you go over the top of it, if your weight gets snagged, all your expensive gear doesn't. You don't fray your leaders, things like that, or you don't fray your bumpers. And so in the Multnomah, I do that. But all these methods work the exact same in the Multnomah Channel as well, and in Willamette. You know, as these fish move up and they get closer to Bonneville, you know, the prawn spinner thing works really good. I don't fish the prawn spinners a lot below Bonneville. Not a lot. I do fish them, but it all depends again on water flow for me. If it's a really heavy water flow below Bonneville, I don't fish the prawn spinners a lot. I like the cut plugs. I like the spin fish. I like something like that because then I'm not worried about the prawn falling off or getting torn up or, you know, whatever. So I like that type of method. Now, when we're rigging these our cut plugs, you know, it's really important with the cut plug that we rig these. When Shane designed this, he designed these to fish with small beads, 4 millimeter, 3 millimeter, tiny beads. You don't want big beads. We want to make this bait as light as possible. You don't need 6, 8 millimeter beads and all that stuff on there. That's insane. You just need 4 beads. That's it. And you can see where he's got his hook set up, just like you would a Westport rig for a cut plug herring, just to where that hook's just past the tail.
I got 2-aughts. So for the double hook setup, I have 2-aughts on here with 4 millimeter beads. This is on the 3.0 size, 30-pound mono, and then your leader length. And fish flashes like to run 40 to 46 inches a leader. Again, run it like you're going to run bait. Judge your water clarity and that type of stuff.
Just like bait.
The other way we really like to run it, I think I have one out right here, is I like to run a 3-hook setup, and these are all 1-aughts. Drop down a size to 1-aughts and run 3 of them with the same 4 millimeter beads and space that out. And that's, it's hard for the fish to get away from that one. It sews them up pretty good. But you got to go to the lighter hooks so that the bait stays up and rotating properly in the strike.
The heavier hook you get, the more your hooks are going to sag in the back, and therefore the bait's not going to rotate around itself like we were talking about, right? And so you want to make sure it rotates around itself. A lot of people are like, you use 1-aught and 2-aught hooks for salmon? I'm like, yeah, man, they crush them. I've caught so many big fish on those. You know, you think you got to have a big hook. You don't, right? That smaller hook's going to penetrate a lot better. How many times you watch that rod just get smoked, peeling line, comes up, nothing, right? A lot of times those bigger hooks, they go to chomp them in their mouth, and there's nothing there to bite it. You know, those big hooks are much thicker wire. And so these smaller hooks, thinner wire, thinner needle point, it tends to penetrate better, right? And so that's what I found with these smaller hooks. And nowadays, you know, I mean, you got a Gamakatsu 2-aught hook. Those things are stout. You're not going to bend one. You know, if you bend one, loosen your drag a little bit.
You get 2 of those stuck in a fish. They're got
done.
pretty good pulling power.
They're done, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Now, bead color, red, chartreuse,
It doesn't matter to me. I don't even care. Shane might.
I match my beads.
I don't
that
care.
way. I like to match green beads with the green chartreuse baits, and
Yeah, I'm not
I go
that picky.
I go with the pink beads and red beads, and depending on what it is. But that's me. It's kind of everybody's thing.
Literally, if he had one rigged and it had 4 chartreuse beads on it, and I went in there and I put 1 red bead in the middle, he would find it before the next day and take it out. That's how anal he is about that stuff. Seriously, I'm not kidding. You got a question back there? 2-aughts on the 3.0s and 1-aughts on the 2.5s.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
You can run a bigger hook. Now, what we found with that, and the reason we run that hook is because if you look at the way this thing's designed to rotate at these slow speeds, it's designed to give you maximum action at the slowest speeds, right? And so, as you can see right here, well, you probably can't see it very well, but as this thing rotates around, it's only going to go so far around this hook. It only has so far it can rotate around. You get a bigger hook, the bait can't rotate around it on the lead hook. So if you want to put a 2-aught hook here and maybe a 3-aught as a trailer, you can do that. But you can't put a 3-aught up here. You don't want to put a 3-aught up here because as this bait rotates around, it's going to hit that hook.
Start catching on.
It'll start to catch it, right? And that's not a design flaw. That's actually a good part of it because it allows you to keep your baits light. We've been trained that you can put all this crap on the salmon stuff and it still flutters. Well, that's what we're trying to get away from. We're trying to make this as simple, as lightweight and easy as we can, because the lighter it is, the more action it's going to have at those slower speeds. Right? So same with the spin fish. Now, everybody here fish prawn spinner? Anybody fish up above Bonneville? Okay, you fish up above Bonneville. This information is still good for down here. Now, we talked about prawn spinners a little bit. Now, we're going to touch on those a little bit heavier. So exactly what is a prawn spinner? Well, you all fish 360s, I imagine, with 3.5 soft spinners, right? That's a mono spinner, right? That's all this is with a little variation, right? You can see how I've tied mine, and you can pass that around if you want.
I'm going to hand this
Look
around.
at it. Those treble hooks are
It's his,
sticky.
so you can go take it home if you want.
Yeah, for sure. Watch out for those trebles; they are sticky. And you look at my blade colors. This is kind of my blade slaughter selection for Spring Chinook. But I tie those again. 30-pound test is what I tie on these. And they come down. My lead hook is a 3/0 Gamakatsu hook. My trailer hook is what is called a Gamakatsu #4 extra wide gap hook. Okay, that's my trailer hook on that one. I've tied that with a noosh knot. You're going to see the lines double between the lead hook and the trailer treble, right? And that noosh knot, you can find it on VIP Outdoors website. Pro does a really good job giving you a lot of awesome tech tips on different ways to do things, right? Pro's really good at this. But look up noosh knot, and what that does is it actually allows me to double the line between those two hooks, right? So I've tied it in 30-pound tests. Well, majority of the time when you catch a fish, between the two hooks is where that line gets sawed and gets frayed and gets weakened, right? Well, by tying the noosh knot on my prawn spinner, now I've got double line between my hooks. So now I've got 60-pound test between the hooks, which allows that to have a little bit more rigidity for one, so it holds that hook out straight. That hook doesn't want to dive down on itself. And I can go through a lot more fish with that 1 leader. Not only that, it's actually a loop. The noosh knot creates a loop, and so you can loop the hook on there. So if your treble gets bent, you can loop it off, put a new one. If you go to a fishery like the ocean, you want to fish a spinner out in the ocean or something, you simply take that off and put another hook on it without having to retie it. And you can see I got a couple beads on there. What I suggest for beads is I stay below a 5mm. 6mm might be the biggest I would use. I use 3 to 5 beads on my prawn spinners most of the time, depending on what I want it to look like and the color pattern I get. I am a little pickier on the beads. If you notice on all those beads, right in the middle is a different colored bead, kind of like a target point for me. And then I just come down to a 3.5, either Cascade or a Mulkey blade or Hildebrandt blade.
I really like the 5mm beads on those, and I'm a blade junkie. I don't know.
Stole more blades out of my boat.
I am a blade junkie, and I will tell you, of all the years of fishing, that Hildebrandt blade is probably one of the fishiest blades on the market. That blade, the shape's a little different based on the sizing. It has a different vibration. That blade was actually developed back in the 40s, I believe, by some pretty smart dudes.
Yes.
And I will put that blade next to any other blade on the market, as it will outfish it day in and day out, especially if you start putting in same colors.
Yeah, the Hildebrandt blades fish really good. My understanding is how they designed the Hildebrandt blades. This is a really cool story. Is when they were designing these, they designed them for bass fishing, for changing them out on spinner baits, right? And so how they came up with this certain cup and the thickness of the blade was they had an old school sonar machine that they put in the water for these feeding schools of shad, right? And so they would mimic, they figured out what this pulse was, or this energy that these feeding schools of shad, when they went by, they give off an electric pulse. So they kind of figured out what that thump, what that vibration was, and they matched it to these blades. So now when they're throwing these spinner baits out for bass, right, and they're reeling it in, the blades that are on the spinner bait are creating the same thump that those shad did when they were coming by. So that's why the Hildebrandt blades were designed the way they were, and they have the cup and they look a little different because they wanted to mimic that. And so it actually mimics the same, energy that a fish, feeding or schooling big fish has when it goes by. That's why the Hildebrandt blades fish so well. They did that in like the 40s and 50s. I don't know what they used to do it, but really cool innovation in that time of, in that time of year. And so, and two things you can do with those blades. Sorry, buddy.
Go ahead.
But he's talking about the Hildebrandt blade. It's a Colorado style. So the Colorado style blades tend to stay closer to your line, right? They tend to stay closer to your line, or if you're on a wired spinner, it stays closer to the body. And so a lot of times if you're getting bit and you notice the fish are all caught in the top of the mouth, right, then they're striking behind it. You might want to change blade styles, right? Because if they're biting behind it, you might want to get a Cascade style blade. A Cascade style blade flares out more from the body. Therefore, those fish coming up behind it can see it better. If you're catching them in the top of the mouth, they're coming up behind it and eating it. If you're catching it in the side of the face, they're coming up the side and swiping at it, which is like a Colorado blade a lot of times. That's why you catch them in the sides of the mouth, is because as that blade spinning, they see it from the side. It doesn't have a huge profile from the back.
Yeah, so if you're dragging it in front of them and you're catching them in the corners, stick with that Hildebrandt blade. And then if they're following or you see them following on the screen, you can switch to that Mulkey blade where they got more visual and more profile, which is that Mulkey Cascade blade. And both of those are great. What I really like about the Hildebrandt is coated in gold, silver, and premium copper.
Yes.
And I think that puts on a different flash down there.
100%.
And there's something to it.
So they're Hildebrandt blades are 24 karat gold, and so they reflect light differently. Most of the time, people have what they just paint gold on, right? And if you paint gold over any other reflection, you get small or you get large flat surface areas of reflective points. Natural gold, silver, and copper, they have thousands of natural reflective points coming out, and so you're getting more reflective surface. You're getting more light refraction off of pure gold, pure silver, or pure copper than you are painted, right? So that's another reason they fish so well. Now you're talking about prawns, like prawns and coon shrimp is what we're talking about, and we're fishing mostly coonies. And they got a bunch of great ones here that are dyed. I think I saw some millennials. I saw some Washington coon shrimp. I think a couple other brands. They all work. All of them work. They work great. I personally cure my own. And again, get my email after this because I'll give you Shane's prawn cure. It's a really freaking good one because I get a lot of fish on it. You're going to want it, and it's free. But you're going to definitely want that cure, right? He's sort of shaking his head like, yeah, that was stupid. But the cool thing about his prawn cure is it's very simple. It's a very easy one to do. And but you want to email me. I can email it all to you right here too when we're done, so you can have the information on the slides that I actually was supposed to have here, and that gives you all your cures on all that stuff. But when you're fishing prawns, very important again to start with good bait. Shane really taught me this. I cured my own bait for a long time. I wasn't as picky until he and I started hanging out. But as you go through them, sort them, take out the big ones, take out the ones with the black heads, take out the ones that are just weird looking. Right? You only want to dye good baits. Right? There's no sense in dyeing a bait that's not worth dyeing. The cures that I have on that list that I'm going to send you, stick exactly to it. That's exactly what I put in my cure. I just did 20 jars of shrimp at home. That's exactly what I did to mine. And we hammerfish on it everywhere, from sockeye at Brewster to coho in the mouth of the Klickitat to Spring Chinook at Drano, the Wind, the Lower River to the Rogue River, everywhere. That cure works phenomenal.
The cures you're going to see on that list are these two: the Zillabait regular shrimp prawn cure, and then the Mag blend. And the big difference between the two is the Mag blend is a very simple cure. It's sweeter. It doesn't have a lot of sodium sulfide in it or any stuff that's what we call heating up a bait. It's a very simple cure that you can add stuff to. A lot of times fish early in the season, cold water, traveling like that more simple cure. Now, when we get up to some of these fisheries like Wind and Drano, or a fishery where the fish are starting to stack up and they're in one spot, swimming a circle, waiting to go into a hatchery or go up a tributary, they start getting stagnant and they need something to, really get them to bite. That's when we switch to a cure that's going to be a hotter cure like the original. It has some sodium sulfide in it, has some more aminos, and it's something that's going to stimulate. And so that's why you bounce back and forth between different cures, is based on the fish. A good traveling fish that's fresh will be snappy towards something plain. A fish that's stagnant and been there maturing, that's seen 3,700 flashers go by his head, needs something to activate him. So that's the difference between the two cures.
And the way you rig your prawns is different. Now, you've seen my setup on how I have that. I use the lead hook, which is the 3/0, right? I use that to hook the bait on there. Now, there's two ways you can hook it. A prawn basically looks like this, right? You can either take and you can put your hook straight through it like this, so it just comes out and just hangs there. And I call that a dead prawn, right? We were actually fishing, I think, Drano last year. We were in the circle, and that day they wanted them dead. They did not want them moving. They wanted them just hanging there. So that means the blade is spinning and the prawn's just trailing. It's not moving. It's not spinning. Nothing. It's just hanging there, and the blade is spinning, right? Now, if you take in that same prawn, I just hooked him this way and drug him. If I turn that same prawn this way, and now I put the hook through here, it causes that prawn to do a little bit of this. Right? And so, again, I'm fishing 7 rods, and so I put out my prawn spinners. 90% of the time when I'm fishing prawn spinners, I'm fishing 360s. But I'm fishing 7 rods. When I got them out there, I'll rig one side of the boat straight. I'll rig one side of the boat the other direction, right? And then I know if all my rods on this side are firing, these aren't getting bit, they don't want them dead that day, or vice versa, right? So pay attention on how you rig your prawns on there, right? What's the prawn doing when you rig it down there? And make sure you rig them the same way you got bit the time before. Okay? Prawns that's very important. Now you want to add scent to prawns? Again, I will say this one more time. This stuff is absolutely awesome. I use it in everything. If you see any video I've ever done, if you see anything I've ever done, this sand shrimp one is great. The salmon one is awesome. That's what I usually mix together is sand shrimp and salmon. Those are my 2 favorite combos.
I mix
This one
too.
is have to have. Yeah, I steal this from his house all the time. All the time. I'll just send him a picture of me with a box of stuff right from his shipping container.
I'll be out fishing and he'll be in my shop.
Yeah, taking pictures.
Yeah,
Yeah.
thanks.
Stole some stuff. Yeah, but you know, the prawn spinner thing is very important. I have found I got a lot of guys that fish different hook configurations, right? And hook configurations. Go ahead.
I noticed on one of those boards you had really small beads, but you have like a bobber stop below them.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I'll show you what I do on that. And so, you know, we were talking about the small beads on the cut plug, and his question was the bobber stop. So I put the bobber stop on here. Every now and then, if I want to fish a bigger hook, like I was talking to you about, like if I want to go out to the ocean and I'm trolling through coho, and I might be going through, you know, 30, 40 fish a day to kill my 10 or 12 or however many I want. Sometimes I want to use a bigger hook, like a 3/0. So if I put that bobber stop underneath these beads, just like this right here, now I can just slide this bobber stop up, you know, just maybe 1/4 inch. Now, no matter what, that cut plug's not going to hit that hook, right? So that's why I put the bobber stop on there.
Gives you some spacing, you know, and it gets you. You get short biting fish, and you want to put hooks back a little further.
Kick it
it's
right
nice
back.
for that.
Yep.
I noticed with the bigger beads, you didn't have the.
Oh, we rig them all different ways. I mean, this is kind of like, you know, I mean, you guys remember the original super baits when they came out? They had the treble hook in the hook garage, and they had the little rubber band, and they had the treble hook behind it, right? How many different ways have you seen to rig a super bait? And that's where we're at with this, right? I mean, it's new. We know 100% with those 4 beads on there like that and the 2/0 hooks, we're going to kill them everywhere. Now we're just experimenting with how else can we rig this thing. We've seen them rigged with tubing, that little micro tubing.
Yeah, Chris V. He had that. He was putting little micro tubing instead of bead with just one little bead on top and bottom for his spacing. That looked great.
Oh, is there one on there that has it? Oh, yeah.
Oh,
yeah.
yep,
So,
just like that.
yeah, just like that. So see, just like that.
So,
and so we're just kind of
that's
experiment
great
with
for
different
spacing.
ways to rig it for different reasons. And you may come up with, again, like I said, don't take everything we say here 100% literal. Make your own.
And here's a double treble setup. There.
Yeah, there's a
So
double
feel free to
treble.
Pass it around. That's another way that I fished it last fall. That's a double treble, has micro tubing on it. Also worked well.
Yep. And don't be afraid to change those, you know. And one of the most important things we didn't really talk about much, but everybody kind of knows this, is all these methods that we're fishing. It's very important. Yes, sir.
Going back to the old brand blade.
Yes, sir.
What size are you talking about?
3.5. Yep, 3.5 is the most common Hildebrand blade size that we do use. However, the 3.0s do work really well in those high pressure situations to where there's a lot of people around. You can downsize your profile. That 3.0 blade does work well too.
Is that because everybody's around 3.5?
I don't know. It may have a different vibration. It may be a different profile. It may thump less times. You know, speaking with Bob Toman over the years, before he passed away, RIP buddy, he would tell me in a conversation we had one time, very interesting conversation about salmon blades, because this guy studied this stuff like no other, right? And he told me that salmon blades need to beat 90 to 120 beats per minute for them to be effective. The closer you can get it to be 120 beats per minute consistently, they'll catch you more fish than, and you know, and so I'm like, oh, how does that work? And so of course I go out and I started looking. We start catching fish on spinners. I check out kind of the
You should
speed I'm
see
going.
him down there counting the rotation. It's comical.
1, 2, 7. God, can I take off my shoes? But so I did that, right? I would count it and then I multiplied it. I'm like, okay, I'm going this fast. This blade's beating this fast if I go this fast. If I speed up a hair, it gets to where I need it to be. And so I kind of found out stuff like that too in certain situations, that blade beating that many times per minute is the key every now and then too. And so again, there's a lot of stuff you can pay attention to as far as factors
VIP
go. And you can go way into the rabbit hole, but that's definitely something
VIP
that
outdoors,
you can do.
order that tubing on.
Is that 90 to 120 beats per minute if you're looking for that. But you know, when you get bit on any of these presentations, it's very important just to leave it there. Like just let it sit there until that rod is bent over, absolutely peeling. You know, basically, you know, peeling outline, or you can just tell it's hooked. Remember, you have a 6,000-pound boat going the opposite direction of a 20-pound fish, right? They're going to connect. If they don't, you weren't going to land it anyway. I mean, that's 100% just a guarantee, right? And so do not reel down, set the hook, none of that, right? You know, ideally you just want to let it do its thing, pick it up, and just keep tension on it and reel. One of the most important things I can tell you with 360 flashers is do not pump it. If you're doing one of these deals, you are going to lose the fish.
I tell all my customers to pump the rod.
Do you really?
Yeah.
Shane's a different animal. Don't listen. You can listen to him on some stuff. On that, I think he's insane, but the guy catches more fish than anyone, so whatever. Me, I don't like it because I end up losing more fish that way, right? And so I like to keep it just tight, and I like to tighten the drag down as much, as tight as I can get it without, being too much where it's going to bust. I just have everybody reel. I don't guide though, so I don't really care if they land it or not. All right, they're not paying me. I don't care.
You mentioned the 3.5 Hildebrandt earlier.
Yeah.
I run the number 4s a lot also, especially if the water's a little dirtier. The number 4 Hildebrandt is almost the exact same size as a normal 3.5 blade. So it's a little bit bigger profile, especially if you're running in some dirty water. So don't be afraid to run both.
Yep. Yes, sir.
You guys are fishing the lower river and stuff like that. You guys switch water depth much? I know it's like predominantly a lot of shallower water, but like in the past, I've noticed with more boat traffic, we'll actually like hook a lot more fish in a deeper slot. Like because I would imagine that pushes those fish away from what's
Lower the water, the deeper I'll fish most time. Like last year, I caught fishing 40 feet was my best. Yeah, my 40 feet. Like down there, like I said, in that Clam area, right? Most time we're fishing that flat. Hell, I'm all the way in the middle of the river, right? And that's where we were getting bit. And so in those situations, like I said, that's why I make those marks, that X mark, right? You know what I mean? So that I knew that I got them in 40. I moved to 30, got nothing, 20, got nothing. So I know I'm in 40. I need to stay in 40. Wherever they're at, they're in 40. Wherever I go. In that particular portion of the tide, right? Like, so if I come out the next day and I'm in the same spot in the tide, roughly-ish, I'm going to fish the same area. And if I notice the next day that that same day that I got 2 fish in that 40, and as that tide sped up going out, it got higher, and I slid into 20. I got 2 fish there. Well, then I'm going to make notes on that, oh, okay, so the tide went up. I moved in. I got 2 more fish, right? So make those mental notes.
Yeah, I, again, compare it to your water conditions. That low clear water, I tend to fish deeper water. I tend to, start looking at that 25, 30 plus stuff as that water comes up and gets more current and gets more dirty to it, then I start scooting in. Those fish are going to find that best path to swim.
Like I said, we spent. I've been fishing buoy 10 since 1984. I've been fishing this whole river forever, right? And all the stuff that I've learned, I just try to pass on, right? I'm not saying it's 100% right or 100% wrong. I'm saying this is what I've learned. This is where I've been successful. These are the things that I check to make sure I check my boxes every day to get done. We're about to wrap up here. One thing I can say, like, as far as the tools that you do use, though, rod is absolutely huge. It is your data system for what is going on under the water, right? Whether you're fishing a plug, a 360 flasher, whatever you're doing, it is your data system. You should have the best data system for the situation that you're fishing in, because it tells you what's going on. If I had a choice to fish 360s or triangles, personally, I like fishing 360s because I know what's going on. I can see them thumping, right? When it stops thumping, it's got grass on it or fish, right? And so I like fishing those 360s for that reason. But the rod tells you a lot. And, if I was going to go out and I'm going to buy a rod for 360 fishing, I'm 100% buying this exact rod again. I tell everybody this because I was a good fisherman anyway, right? I caught a lot of fish. I knew what I was doing. I switched these rods and I caught way more fish just by switching the rods. Same bumper length, same leader length, same line, same reels, same everything, same bait. And I caught more fish every day. And so that's something you really pay attention to when you go purchase, whatever you're going to purchase for whatever technique you're going to do, whether it's drift fishing, float fishing, plug fishing, whatever it is, pick the right rod for the situation.
On these new cut plugs, fish. If you guys are familiar with fish and herring for these springers, fish them like you would bait. Fish them slow, roll them along. They're going to roll. I stuff either tuna or herring inside them with the scents. The fish we got on Tuesday, my wife and I trolling there at I-5 Bridge, I had herring stuff inside it with salmon and tuna belly scent, and just dragging it downhill like a normal herring.
Yeah, and go ahead.
Your fish nip, you want to touch on that a little bit? You guys use that at all?
The fish nip, I have used the fish nip. I do use it on occasion. If I'm in the ocean, I'll use it because in the ocean, it just, anything works. But I've gotten so particular on the scents that I do use. And that's what I was going to cover was like a tuna recipe. My typical tuna recipe for stuffing my spin fish or my cut plugs, literally it's almost the same, almost always. It's a can of either chicken in the sea oil or tuna in oil, Or there's one they make out there. It's called Dolores, I believe, right? It's a gold can. It's a gold can. You can find it like carnicerias, or you can find it on Amazon. And it's just more fishy. Like it's just more tunny. It's not nasty fishy. It's just more fishy. The oil is different. I don't know what it is, but that stuff is awesome. It works really good. And I'll do that, and I'll dump the oil out of the tuna, and then I dump that in. I usually have 2 or 3 Tupperware containers, right? And I'll make 1 can of tuna, right? And I dump the oil out and I save it. Most of the time, my recipe consists of these 2. I put about 2 tablespoons of this in each one of them. I put a little bit of krill powder. That's it. That's my tuna recipe. That's it. That's all I do ever. Ocean, Columbia, tributaries, wherever. That's it. That's my number 1 everywhere I go. Is that. That's it. And it's very simple. That's all you have to do. You don't have to get crazy with your tuna recipe. I will add garlic at some point when the water's above 60, 62 degrees-ish. They seem to like garlic about then. I don't seem to do very well on it. Two rods with this, and we'll have them rigged different ways, like I said, and then that's where the test comes. And that's when this rod went off twice. Okay, everybody switch their hair or switch their prawns. Let's rig them this way. Okay, okay. Everybody go to the sand shrimp one. Okay, this is the jar for the day. This is what we're using for today. If they stop biting it, then I'll go back and I'll start testing it again, right? But don't like Shane said, don't just get tunnel visioned on what you're doing and it's just not working today. Oh, how come we're not getting bit? Well, if everybody else is getting bit, you're not. There's a reason. And the herring recipe I was using this other day that worked really well. I just took out 3 or 4 herring out of a green label package, and I actually chopped them into pieces as it was frozen. I threw them in a tub. I sprinkled a little bit of herring brine on them just to toughen up the little herring chunks. And I threw tuna belly on there and salmon scent, shook it up and let it sit overnight. And that's what I stuffed inside the lure. And that gave that lure a nice tuna-y, herring, bait fish smell. The salmon scent has a little anise. The brine toughened it up, and that was real easy to stuff inside the bait. So really good. Another concoction you can throw in there besides tuna. And don't be afraid to put your coon shrimp in there that we just talked about when you cure those. Absolutely. Put those in there. Sand shrimp are awesome. You get fresh sandies, yeah, for sure. Chop some tails up and throw them in there. The problem is by the end of the, make sure you keep it cool. And by the end of the day, throw it away because it's going to stink tomorrow. Something horrible. Right, but sand shrimp's great to put in there. Salmon roe is good to put in there. I've actually taken the juice from my salmon eggs and soaked tuna bellies or put it in there with the tuna because Spring Chinook love eggs. They love bait, right? They love that smell. They love that, and so soak some of your stuff in like egg juice. That's great. That works good too. So I think that's about covered. You guys, any more questions? We've been talking for an hour and a half, so I was curious if there's any questions. Yeah. Any more questions? Yeah. Yeah, well, if the rod's too short and too stiff, it depends on the lead. So a lighter rod is not going to handle a heavier lead. There's a breaking point in the rod in the middle that's going to create the snap on the flasher. And if you load it up past that breaking point with too much lead, you're not going to get the snap. Or if your lead's too light, you're not going to get that snap. So you want to compare your rod and rod length with what lead you're using. Typically a 9'2" to 9'6" up to an 11'6" rod, a little bit longer stuff is what you want. You start getting down into those 9-foot rods and shorter, it's a lot harder to find that snapping point based on the lead. It doesn't have that recoil that allows that flasher to do its action. There's only 3 rods that make that recoil, and I told you which ones they were: the Okuma, the Edge, and the Striker, that really snap that recoil. And what I'm talking about with recoil is you watch everybody 360 fishing, and the rods are doing this, right? Well, these rods do this, right? The way they've laid their materials, you can see how stiff it is right there. You can see where, even if I grab it back here, you can see it still bends the same spot. See that? I can feel it pushing back on my fingers. That's what makes these rods fish different, is the design and the way they layer the material that allows that rod to snap up. Because now your flasher, instead of doing this, it's doing this. So that bait's back there going. That's what the rod's doing. That's the difference, right? And no matter how fast or how slow you drive your boat with the wrong rod, you will never get the right action. Right? And if I'm fishing, you talk about plugs, right? We talk about plugs. A lot of people ask me questions on plugs. Color or action? action every day. Action every day. Because if it don't work right, it don't matter. It ain't gonna get bit anyway. I don't care what color it is. So just like these, right? Action. That's what you're looking for. Is this my data system giving me the feedback that I need for what I'm doing?
The presentation.
You're not changing a tire with a hammer, are you? So same thing. You know, I mean, don't get me wrong. I've used a hammer to change a tire. I am a redneck child, so yeah, it has happened before. We beat stuff on, but yes. But you see what I'm saying there. So, like I said, when you go to buy a rod, don't just buy a rod. Don't, you know, reels are a little bit different, but rods, it's like the scope on the gun, right? Like, pick the right one. Go.
You go from 2.5s to 3.0s to 4s for spin fishing.
So, okay, that's a good question. So 2.0s, 2.5s, we have in the spin and fish, we have 2.0, 2.5, 3.0, and 4.0. Those are all inch increments, right? 2 inch, 2.5, 3 inch, 4 inch. So we were talking about anchor fishing earlier. These 4 inch work awesome for anchor fishing. They're the exact same size as an M2. Just like Shane talked about putting these on a diver on his cut plugs, you can do that with the spin fish too. You can anchor fish, or you can use leads with these as well. Walk them back there if you got enough current. If you don't have enough current and you still want to fish them, just put a bobber stop in the middle, or a small swivel in the middle of your leader, and put 2 black corkies, big number 4 or 6s in between it. Add some buoyancy to keep it up when that current's rolling and boiling, those tides changes, and that surface or below surface current is changing. Now for the 3 inch, I fish that majority of the time in the big river. Any tributary, when I get inside the wind, get inside Drano, the 2s and 2.5s excel. Hunter, my son, his number 1 big Chinook plug out of every one of these spin fish is this little bitty pink one. I got more pictures of that kid with 30-pound Chinook with that in their mouth than you can possibly imagine. This little bitty pink guy. That's it. Pink spin fish, 2 gold beads, fire. Right? And so that's the only time I would really switch those. The 2s and 2.5s do work a little bit better with less current. So if you're fishing a tributary like Drano that's really tight, you're in that circle, you can't speed up. 2s and 2.5s work better. They seem to turn over and roll a lot better at those slower speeds. And the cut plug, as far as what size of fish and when, I fished the 2.5 and 3 inch from 20 miles out in the ocean, clear to Lake Michigan last year, and it didn't matter. It didn't matter which size, they bit them all. I never noticed one outfish the other.
One thing I did on the cut plugs last year, the one main time the 2.5 really fished better than the 3.0 as I fished the summer Chinook fishery over in Eastern Washington, over Brewster and Chelan Falls. And the 2.5 excelled over there where they didn't want the bigger bait. And I really think it's because the water was so clear. Yeah. And those fish are a little further upriver, a little bit more mature, and they just wanted that smaller bait. So there's obviously times, but both seem to work pretty well.
Any more questions? Yes, sir.
I find on the spin fish, if you're fishing any kind of speed in the water, you got to change your leaders because it burns through.
I honestly haven't had the problem for the leaders burning through them. I fish them out in the ocean. I fish a spin fish on a 40-pound test. 40 in the ocean, sometimes 50.
Even at a 50.
Really?
Take it off in a little bit of time. After 2 or 3 hours, you can actually look in the leader and see.
Oh, really? I'll be darned. I've never done that. Huh. Have you noticed it was a certain size that did it different than the others? Because it could be the angle.
The 2.5s or 3s, the same thing.
Okay. Well, that's simple. I mean, his complaint was that the spin fish sometimes fray the leader, you know, as you run them. And I guess I've never really looked, but I change my leaders after every day, or if one breaks off or whatever, I guess I don't look. But I'll look at that on the factory, and I'll see if maybe we can change the angle of the holes drilled to where it's more of an angle and not as steep, and so maybe it won't do that. Or maybe make it a little bit bigger.
You can look right at the leader, you can see where it's
Okay. Yeah. Okay. Yeah, I'll look at that and see. That's the beauty about being at the factories. We can change stuff.
I haven't noticed that one either, but yeah, it's absolutely. Don't need to be breaking off fish.
No.
First time I noticed it, just started bleeding.
Oh, really? Yeah. 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 Spinning stuff's bound to cut something at some point. But yeah, I'll look at that. But thanks for letting me know. There's the only way I can make adjustments and fix those things, you know. Any more questions? Well, thanks everybody for coming. We appreciate it. I hope you all catch fish. If you all want my email, to email me to get this presentation that I have, because it has all that stuff, my email is Jarod H, JARODH @yakimabait.com.
Come up and look at this stuff.
Yep.
I got some cards up here too.
I forgot
if you
my
want to go
cards.
fishing.
I forgot my cards. So.
We appreciate it. Thanks, guys.
Thanks, bro. Oh, fuck, bro. You know how hard that is for me? Yeah. I got a list 5 years long. Dude, I got a list 5 years long of people. That's the hardest part. It's like,